2 wines.
Okay. What's your favorite one? Red or white? Hold on, first. Okay. All right.
I'm sophisticated.
I think a part of me was just like, y'all, we've been great. You're just now figuring it out, but we've been great. That's who we are. It's in our DNA.
So like, you my Colossus Deadpool, like impersonation, 1 or 2 moments, right? It's.
And I'm sitting there in my head going, I wonder if I can somehow sniff the traffic going from the armband. It's got to be talking to an API or something.
To the next cocktail, to the next conversation. All right, everybody, welcome back to the C3 podcast. I am your host, David Lee. Welcome back for another season. So happy to have this season going on. And as you all know by now, if you followed this podcast now, you all know that every single guest on this podcast is special. So we got another special guest coming up, Mr. Serge Ngatta. Did I nail the last name?
You got it. Got it.
I was practicing all day. I was like, I am not gonna mess up this man's name. No, it's probably something that I put more thought into than most people, right? I grew up, man. Your name is that's a big deal, right? And
yeah,
so
it is. It really
pronounce
is.
somebody's name correctly, to me, not only shows a sign of respect, but it's just the respect due that that's your name. So I wanted to make sure that I got that right. So
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, man. So welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a real honor. You know, I've been checking you out, listening to some of the prior conversation, and really excited to be here.
Appreciate it. So for the audience that's listening and or watching, just let them know a little bit about you.
Sounds good. So my name is Serge Ngatta, as you introduced me. I'm a product manager for Equifax right now, working in the identity space. That's actually how you and I met, right? Because we are both peers in the same industry.
Yeah.
And I'm also, a father of 3 beautiful young girls. Obviously, I'm a husband as well. Originally from the Ivory Coast in West Africa, but I've been living in the US for the last 20 years, and this is home now. And so, really passionate about everything that has to do with product, and also everything that has to do with financial literacy in our community, right? So
yeah,
obviously very, very deep attachment to the culture. So I guess that's kind of a short summary of who I am.
Okay, absolutely. And that, it's then it's serendipitous that we connected, because those two things are two of the things that I am really, really passionate about. Yeah. And that, I want to, especially with this season as I go into it, talk about more, especially the financial literacy side of it, right? I haven't really touched on that a whole lot, but newsflash, it's coming. I'm gonna hit on that some more, but yeah, so that that kind of leads me into some of the discussion, right? Because for those two things to kind of be things that you're passionate about, right, you're kind of lined up really at a perfect place, to do that at Equifax, right? From the identity side, and then from the financial literacy side, just considering what Equifax does. So talk to me a little bit about your journey into that world in identity, right? And how you kind of wind up at Equifax and some of the things that you like there.
Absolutely. No, it's always an interesting path. I don't think anybody ever just decide that they're going to work in identity, right?
Nope.
You kind of stumble upon it, right? And so for me, most of my professional career was in the automotive space until I decided to go back to school and get my MBA. And when I came out of there, I was looking for a changing career, and I got into banking with Wells Fargo. And so that was kind of my introduction to that identity space, right? Unknowingly at first, because I was in the credit card department, and more focused on the customer experience with our rewards program. But as you know, financial services fraud, is a big component of it. And so quickly you're going to be drawn towards, okay, what's causing this fraud? What is the issue with everything that we're doing in terms of authentication and validating identities?
Right.
And so fast forward, I spent 6 great years at Wells Fargo. And when it was time for a change, I was approached by Equifax, which kind of works out well because I live in Atlanta, and Equifax is headquartered here in Atlanta. So it was a wonderful opportunity that I couldn't pass. It was for the global team that kind of manages all of our products across our international footprint. So that's 24 countries. And this was pre-COVID, right? So there was a lot of growth and travel involved with the nature of this role,
Right, right.
it intrigued me, right? So I was, Equifax was also coming out of their digital transformation and really building the future of their product suite. So it was really interesting for me. So when I joined, I deep dove right into our identity fraud and compliance team,
Gotcha.
and we were starting to build identity verification products. So, we've it's been 18, 19 months now of a long journey of building and standing up and engaging with multiple partners in different footprints. And so it's been a great experience. We've recently launched the product in the States, and really exciting because that's kind of another beginning of another journey, right, from that product life cycle.
Right.
So this is kind of how I ended into identity, but now I'm stuck, right, because what we're doing is critical. and
Yeah.
identity is so ubiquitous, right? I mean, not even a product, right? Just think about the concept of identity. Who am I?
Right.
Who are you? Are you who you say that you are? And now with COVID, right? Fast forward after COVID, the pandemic, and everybody being, confined, you have to accelerate your digital transformation, because now everything we're doing, from ordering groceries to streaming videos, or like doing all kinds of health and wellness
Yeah.
activity, your therapist, all of that is online now.
Right.
And there's multiple exposure to verifying who you are, multiple touch points, should I say. And so identity is just all over us, and now it's just hard to kind of forget that, right?
Yeah.
It's ingrained in your DNA.
And it's so it's funny you talk about it. Like I just had Instacart dropped off like 10 minutes ago, right? Um, but what's so very interesting now, right? What I tell people is, like, identity is this small niche within cybersecurity that has this huge depth of like places that you can go within it, right?
Right.
And so it's this little mini galaxy inside this other big galaxy of cybersecurity. And it's it's the whole, if you've seen Men in Black, right, at the end where he kicks open the door and it's like, oh wait, what? I was like that. And I tell people, like, that's identity, because there's so many different aspects to it. And people get into cybersecurity and they immediately go to all the fun and people call the sexy stuff. I want to hack, I want to do network stuff, I want to do exploits and all these things, whatever. And
Right.
that's cool. And I'm not knocking that, right? I've had people on this podcast that have done it. I've got friends that do that. But it's so interesting now that when I talk to those security professionals and I tell them, I was like, look, but all the things that you're trying to get to do, right? So think about it. If I go and exploit a network, the first thing I want to do is then move sideways and go get access, right? You're trying to go and get more access. I was like, so what do you think is handling and managing like all of that, the identity and the access that you get? It's identity. And then you go to the consumer side, which you just kind of hit on, right? Which we've seen with this pandemic literally took us. It's not like we were in a stone age, but it was just people were very slow to adopt it. And it just, in 18 months, people just had to go like, we got to do it now, right? Like companies that didn't have any kind of online ordering or anything, like, had to automatically do it. And what does that mean? To your point, identity. I got to know who this person is. I got to be able to collect information about my customer. I got to be able to deliver these certain attributes. I got to verify that this is the person. I have to deal with fraud, right? Every company literally became an identity company overnight, because it's like, oh, I got to take in online orders, I got to take credit cards, I got to, like, I didn't have to do any of this, and I mean, it was like this, right? Yep. And the funny thing, that this is the joke I tell everybody, is like, look, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. This is the only one I kind of have. I was like, low key, man, like Chick-Fil-A was in on all of this, because like day 2, they were already at online ordering that had everybody out. I'm like, it's like y'all knew this was coming or something. Like, Chick-Fil-A didn't do nothing. But like, and for identity and security geeks like me, immediately I knew from a business aspect, I was like, they have been ready. Like, they have been prepping and preparing their systems to be able to do this. Like, and not to say that they knew that all of a sudden, like, a pandemic would shut down the world, but they knew that, hey, we want to be able to service our customers in various different ways. And I think it's maybe something that I may reach out and try and do. Like, it'd be awesome to do a case study, right, on how identity, right, was core to what Chick-fil-A kind of rolled out. Because, I mean, if you think about it, the Chick-fil-A app where you authenticate, again, the credit card to be able to pay, you log in there, you scan all this stuff or whatever. And that now seems to be a little bit more norm because other companies are doing it. But that's a little bit of a tangent. But man, so yeah, it is here to stay, right? And it's driving us towards this kind of new direction of what we always saw in futuristic movies, right? Of kind of what's really kind of like this decentralized identity, right? Where your identity is this thing right here, right?
That's right.
Like,
Right.
I mean, Apple Wallet, Google Pay, whatever you want to use, you've got access to be able to identify who you are and then make those payments from this, right? So, and I really think that's going to change how we operate, because now, like, I was already a big tech head, right? As I was always using Apple Pay and stuff like that. Then the pandemic happened. Now I'm like, I ain't touching nothing but my phone, right? If you ain't got Apple Pay, I'm not going. But we did see, like, we saw a big surge in like tap to pay and contactless and things of that nature with credit cards and things of that nature. So yeah, man, it's been great. I think for us that are in identity, right? Because it's like, all right, all these
job
things.
It's the ultimate job security, man.
Right. And you know what? So, and for me, most of my career has been on the employee side of it, the workforce side of it, right?
Okay.
But what's interesting now is this consumer side of it, right? And how it's not quite, to me, it's a similar problems, right? You have to be able to understand like who the person is and identify them, but you've got fraud, you've got account takeover, you've got a marketing aspect to it, you've got customer privacy and protection aspect to it that you really don't have on the workforce, right? Which I had a conversation earlier with one of my colleagues, and we were debating whether or not you could truly have one system that does workforce and customers. And I'm like, I don't know. I think they got to be separate, because there's so many things that are now demanded from a consumer side, because you got all this privacy and consent and things of that nature that you got to deal with, that when we sign up to work with people, we just kind of like, okay, like, you want my social and what else? Like, here you go. But we have no clue what they're doing with it, right?
Right.
Exactly. So
it's a good point, right? Because like, if people do see value, they will share some PII, right? Like, they'll share data, but they have to see value into what you're providing. But there's so much to unpack in just what you just said, right? Because I mean, identity, digital transformation, merchants, the whole ecosystem, the whole way we're going about commerce these days is digital, right?
Yeah.
And so it's if you try to solve identity all at once, you might try to boil the ocean, right?
Yeah.
And so how do you focus on these segment that you're going to target first and prioritize, and get your proof of concept stand up, and make sure that everything is working as designed, right? That becomes critical and becomes very strategic, because I mean, like you said, right now everybody wants a digital solution.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, you're not going to be able to solve everybody's problems at the same time. So how do you leverage your strengths to go to market? I think those are kind of like interesting points as well to consider. So, but yeah, it's a very interesting space. We're talking about today Robinhood, right? Like, as we're recording this podcast, we just heard about 7 million consumers who got breached, and it's another compounded effect of this accelerated digital transformation, right? Like, the consumer is not really ready to really understand all of the risk that is involved in all those digital transactions that they're doing every day, right? Like, you and I know, because we're in this stuff, right? So day in, day out, we understand, and we probably are, telling everybody who wants to hear about how to protect themselves. But it's not it's not easy, because even people who are aware, for instance, that you shouldn't use the same password, on multiple accounts. I mean, at some point in time, they get tired, right? Like, you have, I think the relationship now is like 1 to over 100 accounts, right? So you have 100 credentials that you have to manage on a daily basis. You're not going to remember password, so you're going to always use the same one. Maybe add like one at the end, or add another digit, or another special character, whatever. But it's essentially the same password, which makes it easier to crack, right? And the other thing that we don't talk about a lot, in identity, is that we put a lot of emphasis on technology and the last silver bullet that's just going to be the one size fit all and solve all of the issues, even though it never really happens like that. But the basis of all of those breaches is social engineering,
Mm.
So it's really the human aspect, that is the weakness that is always getting penetrated
Right.
in food companies, right? Like, and
That
so
was and from what I've read, and I just saw the report or the
Mhm.
article about it by Robinhood earlier. Like the way the person got in was it was through customer support, and they faked authenticating somebody that they weren't through the customer support of the phone. And yeah, like it's we are. I think most of society is so programmed. Like you call in customer support and they ask you for information, right?
that's right.
Give me what's your name, what's your address, what's this, what's that, or whatever. And we don't,
Yeah.
people just don't think about it. You just go and give it. It's like okay, but it's like I remember the first time. I mean, this was about 10 or 15 years ago that I really thought about it, right? Because again, I'm in this field. This is what I'm doing. I'm helping different companies implement this. And I call in and they ask me all these questions, and I'm just like, all right, so that's it. So now that you have that, now we can just talk about just like you guys have to know, like I was like, all that is information that I could find out literally by Googling, right?
Exactly.
Like it's really not that hard to get this information that you just asked to verify. But it's to your point, right? It's that aspect, that human aspect of the social engineering that we don't really talk about, we don't really cover. And then it's another part that while tech has sped up on like kind of like the defensive side, right? What we do on the networks and how we're going to manage all these accounts and access and all this stuff or whatever.
Yeah.
What we haven't sped up with or even like looked at is like, so how do we deal with all this now data that is just widely accessible? Right.
Oh
So
yeah.
what happened, right? So 20 years ago now, social media was born. And now all of a sudden, like there's just floods of information that we are freely giving away and putting on the internet. And it's just out there floating around.
That's
Right.
right.
Before the only consolidation places were the LexisNexis, Equifax, and of the world, and that stuff wasn't digitally really accessible. Now it's just like
Everywhere.
right,
It's big data, right? Like
right, yeah,
data
it's
palooza or something. No, you're right, right? I think you mentioned that earlier, right? 2007, Steve Jobs comes up with this little device here, and boom, right? Like it democratizes the internet, democratizes access to a lot of services, banking, everything is in your pocket now. This is more powerful than your Windows 95 machine that you had back in the days from a processing standpoint, whether you're a gamer or just playing computer head. So now literally you can do everything that requires a computer just with your fingers, right?
this is how I drive
And
my car.
right. Right, you can
Like
open the car,
I got a Tesla. This
your
is
home.
my key. Like
You know what I mean?
yeah, I
I
walk
think
up.
Hyundai is doing that, right? Hyundai is a manufacturer that kind of did that. I think BMW as well. So manufacturers are now, everybody's playing off of your phone, right?
Right.
Like mobile wallets, right? Identity wallets. I mean, you name it. Everything is now focused on that device, which makes it kind of an extension of your identity, right?
Right.
And so data now is just coming in throws, structured, unstructured videos, pictures. Now you think about TikTok, right? Think about the TikTok phenomenon. How many billions of videos are being uploaded on a daily basis on TikTok or Instagram reels? Now everybody's kind of having like these stories features, right? Like even
Yeah.
LinkedIn, right? Like is now doing the
Right.
story, you know so it's like it's just it's out there, and people are always oversharing. I think we've gotten into this habit of developing this virtual world, right? Like where now a lot of our relationships are conducted electronically. I mean, we still have like your family, your friends, your relatives, whatever that are in your life on a day-to-day basis, but you probably have a bigger network online than you actually have in real life, right?
Yeah.
And and if you're an entrepreneur or if you're a merchant or if you're small business or whatever, I mean, your entire life now is online, with these various channels. So yes, access to data is just readily available, but I think that the one thing that doesn't really allow these social media companies to be kind of the right folks to safeguard identities because of their business model, right? Like they're all about monetizing that data.
Right.
And ultimately that's not in your best interest as a consumer, because now you're the product, right? You're being marketed on a daily basis, and it's all about ad revenue. So you know it's an interesting dilemma that we're in right now, because as you mentioned, right? Like you have the banks, right? That kind of or that trusted partner of our financial data, but consumer don't necessarily trust their banks, as much as well, right? So and everything else in the tech ecosystem is all about this monetization of your data. So how do you really entrust somebody with the data, right? Like with your consumer data, your personal data.
Right.
And it's interesting because everybody's building those private identity networks, right? Like they're kind of like repositories of trusted IDs so that everybody can
Yeah.
share, or like the whole concept of consortium data. Um, but that there needs to be interoperability, amongst all of these networks, right? Because otherwise, it's about who has the biggest network. It's just, but still operating in a silo, right? Like I
Yeah.
think the one thing that we know fraudsters and bad actors are doing really well is collaborating, right? Like they share data and resources, vulnerabilities. Once they found something to exploit, I mean, it's on the dark web in instance, right? And
Right.
everybody's trying to hit that. And so, how do we, us, the good guys, develop the same approach? How do we put profit aside and, bunch our strength together, put our strength together to really come up with a bigger consortium that will allow us to nip that fraud in the bud. I think that's part of the challenge, right? And you know, when you're in the for-profit business, it's a lot more challenging to do.
Yeah. And you
So
know what? To add on to that, and I think part of it has to be the shift, and we've seen a little bit of it with identity the last couple of years, in that one, identity has to become more central to, right, your actual security posture. Right. In the past, identity has just been this thing that I had to do to get to something else. Right. Either on the security side, which is like, well, I got to do these things, I got to authenticate you. But what I really want to do is manage all this and my policies and my networks and all this stuff or whatever. On the consumer side, it's like, I just need to know who you are so I can sell you a bunch of stuff, right? Like I don't really care. Like just make it easy so they can sign up, and then now I can I can email them, I can do this, I can like all these things, whatever. Financial, KYC, know your customer. I need more. This is just a thing in my way so I can get to what I really want, which is more data about the customer so I can sell them services, right? So we never treated identity like an actual core foundational thing to do. And so I'm seeing that start to shift a little bit. I'm actually seeing in some organizations, identity is shifting underneath the CISO, right?
yeah.
So it's being rolled into CISO operations, which means now as a CISO, and you start to look at overall your objectives for that year, and so your security operations, part of that is identity, and what do we do with that, right? So, but I think as that gets bigger, we're going to have to look at that and say, all right, now we need to make some decisions around identity and how we want to do this. And I think part of it is what I'm kind of pushing on the workforce side, and just in general, is that we can learn from how we look at it on the consumer side, which is stop looking at it as identity as a way to, as like the insurance sale, like you want to protect against something. Start thinking of it as a revenue driver. Like if you get this right, look, this allows you to connect with your customers and get more data and access more things. Like if this allows you to get more sales,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Apple, I have this saying with my buddies. I was like, Apple has silently become like the de facto standard in identity, right? To your point, Steve Jobs started with this, right? But since then, what did they do? They started building an ecosystem around it, right? To where your laptop now, the
Yeah.
AirTags, like your devices, like
Yeah.
everything talks, and your identity is moving around there. They just recently the digital identity standard that they're approved for to be able to do digital driver's licenses, right?
Yeah, I saw that. That was really cool. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
I
they,
felt like
they,
that was a
they,
huge
they
thing
they
that,
drive a
of course,
license
I'm
in
a
Hawaii.
nerd, right? Then I read that. I'm like, why is somebody talking about this? Everybody's like, oh, whatever. I'm like, all right. But
No, I think it's cool. It's really
yeah.
cool. I love what Apple is doing, on the privacy side of things, and really touting the security, right? Like as a service
Yep.
almost, right? I think everybody can attest to that if you compare, Android versus Apple. I think that they're a little bit more secure, but I think the challenge that Apple is going to face, right, is that they're for profit ultimately, right? So even though it sounds great everything that they're saying, like your privacy, or really care about all of that. I mean, at the end of the day, they just want to lock you into their ecosystem, right? Like,
Yep.
so it's a catch 22. But I do agree that Apple, as a huge, huge impact into the identity space, and they should definitely be a partner just because of the sheer scale that they have,
Yeah.
the technology innovation that they've been responsible for the last couple of years, uh, and kind of their stance on the privacy debate, right? Compared to everybody else who's just like, sell data, sell data, sell data.
Right.
So they're a little bit more, I'd say in the middle when it comes to that, and they'll definitely be a big time player in the
Yeah.
identity space
And I
going
think it's
forward.
going to be interesting to see, like, because I'm surprised that I haven't seen them at any of like any of the identity conferences, any of the cybersecurity conferences, right? As much as they do, right? When you think about
Mhm.
like what they roll out, sign in with Apple, right? Which is really,
Right.
yes, it's just an OIDC implementation, but like, what where they're going with that and the integration
Yeah.
that they've done with their SE element secure chips, right? Like they've done so much in this space. I
Yeah.
was like, to be where they are and not as connected with the community, I find that interesting, right? You can kind of take it one of two
Yeah.
ways, right? Either they're just like, we don't need y'all, or they just, haven't decided to come in. So it's like, are you guys kind of off doing your own things? But it was nice to see them kind of accept some standards and start using that to build on top of. So yeah, they're going to
Mhm.
be an interesting player to watch. Again, like I
Yeah.
would not be surprised, 5 years from now, if we, how we look at Apple, right? It's already changed over the years, right? But how we look at them, I think completely
Yeah.
changes, right?
No,
Like,
I agree. I agree. I think they are in an interesting phase of their life cycle right now, right? Like we know iPhones is still a cash cow, but it's more on a decline now, and so they're probably thinking about like what is next, right? From their perspective, we've seen a lot of focus on services, right? Like kind of doing a lot of the TV, the content, and building that entire ecosystem where folks can stay in Apple. They get into IoT now with the home kits, the Apple Home hubs. Um, that they got CarPlay. I mean, they're into your telematics in your vehicles now. I think that I've kind of heard of stories about them also building an electrical vehicle, but we haven't really seen
yeah,
anything from that. I kind of
right.
foiled that, right? So I mean, they're all over the place, and I don't see them going anywhere anytime soon, right? I think they have a lot of regulatory pressure on them right now, especially with the fees that they're taxing on their store, and so with the lawsuit against the Fortnite company, I forgot the name of the company, but it'll probably coming back. But those are probably inflections points in their development that might change things in the future. But I think from a strategy standpoint, they're going to continue to go the privacy route because I mean ultimately that's the way to the consumer, right? Like you and I know that developing these mechanisms to protect your identity online and things like that, that's going to come with education, right? That's going to come with
Right.
repetition. That's going to come with being overly exposed to those things and understanding that there are risks out there. It's going to come from seeing all of those breaches that are happening like more and more frequently in the craziest industries, right? Like I'm thinking about the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack like early in June, right?
Yep.
Like just couldn't see that coming. Something that could literally just like immobilize an entire country, right? So no, I think like for instance, I have young kids right now. My oldest daughter is 7 years old, and she loves her Fire tablet, right? But as she started playing with it, and she started wanting to buy games and stuff like that, daddy's got to enter his information and his credit card. So I actually have to train her on all of those, measures that she needs to take so that I don't become a victim. And I think they're going to grow, right? Like in the world where this is normal for them, right?
Oh yeah.
Like the biometric verification and all of the face fingerprints. Who knows what they'll do? Like maybe they'll do retina scans and all kinds of crazy stuff, in the future. But that's the ways of the future, right? Like we know like all of the knowledge-based authentication and risk-based authentication. I mean, risk-based is here to stay, but knowledge-based is probably going to go down because all that information is available in the dark web,
Yeah,
right?
it's available.
It's no longer the right way to go about it. So I'm really curious to see how all of these guys are going to play and a role into that in defining that future state. And I do think that the CRAs, the Equifaxes of the world, have also a very strong role to play in that ecosystem. And so I'm curious to see how all of that is going to
Yeah,
pan out.
definitely. So I want to switch gears just a little bit, right? I want to go back to your kind of journey through identity, right? So from the financial side of Wells Fargo, and then and through that time there, coming into Equifax. But like, talk to me about because everybody's journey is always a little bit different. To your point about getting into identity, but tell me a little bit about as you got into it, right?
Mhm.
How how you went forward to kind of build your confidence and the different things that you learned and picked up, and like how
That's
you
a good
how
question.
you got good at it, right? Because a lot of
Yeah,
people ask me, like, how do you become good at identity? Because it's all these little abstract
yeah.
things. So dig into that a little bit for me, right? Just kind of walk me through your
Yeah, yeah, no, no, no. Great question, great question. And I think that you're never an expert when you start anything, right? But you develop that expertise over time, and in order to do that, you have to be committed to lifelong learning. The way I see it, right? I'm a big proponent of that as well. You never stop learning about new things, because the day you stop learning is the day you die, right?
Absolutely.
So I deep dove into it, man. Like at first you get into those meetings, and how organization work, right? People just throwing a whole bunch of acronyms, just throwing on your heads, and you're just pinging people on the side like, hey, what is that? What does that mean? But and then you get like drinking from the fire hose phase, right? Like you get hit with all of the confluence pages, and all of the throws of data that they have in documentation. So you just plow through that. um I would say for me, what I did first was trying to understand what we had, what our products were doing, and coming from the business side, from banking, I was very customer centric, right? So I was trying to understand again, what problem are we solving for our customers, and what is the market really in this identity space. So I started reading a lot about just secondary research, your Forresters and Gartners, and any kind of reports that I could put my hands on in terms of fraud and identity. Discovered a lot of great resources. Did a little bit of competitive analysis, right? Because your competitors are always going to inform, what the industry is doing. And given that there's so much in this space, it was an intense ramp up, I would say. I think within about 3 months, I was comfortable understanding concepts, even though I wasn't quite fluent
Right.
in language or the terminology. I understood some of the concept, right? And when it comes to identity, really, like we're saying earlier, identity and fraud, right? Like they're two sides of the same coin. Um, it's all about the use cases, right? Like, what are you trying to accomplish? What information, what data are you collecting? What transformation you do to this data, and how you react to the decision that come out of your system. And so, it got really interesting, because it's kind of like cops and robbers, right? Like, because we're the good guys trying to protect our systems, trying to protect our customer systems, make sure that they can say yes more confidently to good customers, because we know that if at the top of the funnel you feed them good customers, then you have less of a chance to have a fraudulent behavior, on the back end. And so,
Right.
how do we go about solving that with various technologies, right? Because again, there's not a silver bullet out there. Different companies do it in different fashion, very innovatively. So it got really fun, because I started learning and I started discovering this entire ecosystems of PII, of digital signals, of behavioral analytics, and all of the information that we can share just by performing a transaction on one of those devices. So it got really interesting, and I'm stuck. Like right now, every morning when I wake up, I have a couple of podcasts that are lined up. I'll just fire them up and make sure that I get my content for the day, and,
Right.
and I'm ready to go. Right, and then now my brain is kind of triggered, right? Like, so I will look for this type of information. So this morning, Robin Hood stuff popped up in my feed, right?
Yeah.
So because Google knows that I'm looking for fraud and all kinds of identity searches, and so it's feeding me the stuff. So that was what I did, right? Like, and it wasn't, I'm not trying to be pretentious or not saying that, I'm more intelligent than anybody, or it's all you have to do, really. You just have to
Right.
learn, and you have to be open-minded, and you can't be afraid to ask questions, especially when it comes to identity. If
Absolutely.
something is not clear, it needs to be clarified,
Yeah.
because it can mean different things to different people. So that was the process for me, at least.
Okay.
Yeah.
um, and that's awesome. And it's there's a lot of patterns as I've talked to different people. My same background with it, right? Because this identity is fairly new, right? Maybe 30 years old, maybe, right?
Mhm.
It depends on how far you go back and what you consider identity, right? You talk to
Right,
somebody,
right. I was about to
the
say,
old Netscape directory, and they were like, "We were doing this back," and it's like, "All right, whatever, Grandpa, sure you are."
the yellow pages.
Right, but so from there, right? And so now, like, what I think is very interesting is that now you're in this, kind of product, you're product manager, right?
Yeah, correct.
And so product manager role over identity. So talk to me a little bit about just kind of what's that like? Because the cool thing about product, right, being in product management is, really working with and defining, to your point, like the use cases and
Yeah,
what is it that, the your end user is going to use. And so
yeah.
specifically, you talk about that with identity. What are some of the things that you're looking at, right? In a general sense, right?
Mhm.
That you really
Yeah,
want to focus on. Is it
yeah.
like, do you trigger more on like, oh, there's these new specs and new this coming out, or is it more about, hey, like what responses are we getting from customers around, what
Mhm.
they think about privacy, things like that? So
Right, right. Well, I think it's twofold, because when it comes to identity, you kind of have to think about, um, the commercial and the consumer side of things, right? Because they're two different things, but they are, joined at the hip. So your B2B, your customers or your clients, or businesses who sell products and services, so they have consumers that they're trying to identify, and you're trying to help them with a solution that will, meet their need in their resources and their budgets, and whatever constraint they have around getting that done. And then you have the consumer, right, who's also looking for better experiences. And now in this age of, social media and digital economy, it's all about the frictionless experience, right? Everybody wants to be frictionless, but friction is good, right? Because friction is kind of helping you to gauge the risk, right? So for
right,
the right amount of risk, you should apply the right amount of friction. And again, consumers don't mind if they see value in the
exactly,
service that you're providing. So it's kind of a, it's a balancing act, right? Because you have to navigate those two ecosystems. You got to understand your customer and his business, right, and what makes him tick. And you also have to understand his consumers, right, like their
mm,
behaviors, and
yeah,
how the identity experience could help, that business to grow and mature. And so it's interesting. And to add an additional layer of complexity for Equifax, now we're global. So now I got to look
right,
at like multiple regions, right? So now
yeah,
identity takes a whole different, scale, because for the same problem that you're trying to solve is being done differently in different places. Something as simple as your address formatting looks different, whether you are in Asia or you are in North America, right?
right,
So it's not going to be the same solution. So it's it's interesting because it's a dynamic space, very fluid. Uh, you know, a lot of it is, um, rests on the technology of the moment, right? Like, so you have to be mindful of trends that are coming and where we're going, right? Like, for instance, right now, one thing that piqued my interest is this whole concept of metaverse, right? Because we're already thinking about a virtual world and what that entails in terms of now your identity. We can't even figure out like how to solve your identity in the real world. Now think about how you're going to solve identity in the
yeah,
metaverse, right? So all of those things start like kind of clicking in my head, and I'm thinking, okay, I want to be futuristic. Where's the pucks going to be, 5, 10 years from now?
right,
And but you don't want to sacrifice, building cool stuff that you think is futuristic for the pragmatism of the now, right? What
Right.
people are using now and what's going to
Right.
move the needle for your business now. So I think in product, it's the hardest challenge for me. How do you innovate, but don't innovate so that like you're too far ahead of your consumers, right? Like how do
Right.
you, restrain yourself from being too left field and actually staying pragmatic enough to stay in tune with the business and to generate revenue for your organization. So
Yeah.
that's
It's
the
like
challenge.
it's like you have to be almost like exactly 1 to 2 steps ahead, right?
Right.
Because you don't want to be 3 to 4
Right.
because your customer's going to struggle to get there. You want to be 1 to 2, so where they're like, hey, it'd be really cool if you. Oh, it does do that. Hey, it'd be
That's
really
right.
cool. Oh, that is coming, right?
That's it.
But you want to present. You don't want to present in step 4 and 5. Where it's like, oh, you can really do this, and they're just like, okay, that's cool, but I don't. I just need to do this, right? Like, to give it concrete examples. I remember, so I used to always pick on privilege access management because when I would work with customers, right, we lay out this huge identity access management strategy, right? So here's your authentication. Here's what we're going to do for authorization. Here's what we're going to do for provisioning. Okay, we got all this good stuff here. This is nice. We got this set up. And I was like, hey, but like over here with this privilege access management, right? And we can put some really good policies around here. And that was always step 3 and 4 because they'd be like, look, I need my users to be able to start day one and get their access. Don't talk
Right.
to me about the Linux accounts and then admin. Sir, I'm good. I was like, okay.
That's
Step one,
right.
two. Got you. We'll get to 3, 4.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a big deal, right? Because a lot of the time, when you build a product, you become in love with your product so much that you just fall in love with the product and you totally discard the customer problem that you're trying to solve.
Right.
And one of the things that I think we're doing a great job at Equifax and in financial services in general now is really trying to be customer centric and focus on the customer first approach and really trying to keep that as the guardrail, or the north star to everything that you're doing. So
Yeah.
that kind of helps, rein in all of the wild ideas and innovation that are just cool to have, right? So like it's kind of like blockchain, for instance, right? Great technology, um, multiple use cases developing over time. So we know that there's potential there, but it's like who wants to have the first phone, right? Like it's not much fun if you the first guy with the telephone. Like who you calling?
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
It's a network effect, right? So you want to have more people on the network so that now it's interesting. Now the more people you have, the more data you can feed off and draw analytics and make decisions. So it's a catch 22. You gotta stay focused, but you gotta think about the future, but you gotta be grounded in reality.
Right. Exactly.
Yep.
Cool. All right. So one more gear shift, man. I wanna hop over to the diversity topic, right? Especially
Yes.
within tech, especially within identity. So the truth to this matter is ain't a whole lot of people look like us rolling around talking about identity,
That's right.
or cybersecurity in general, right? That it is a real problem over the last kind of 18 months. We've seen we've seen that problem exacerbated, right? I mean, even into the social issues we saw, the protests we saw around the world, all came down to the fact that hey, at the end of the day, what we're seeing is that while we like to talk diversity, right, we just don't see it. We have a problem actually executing it, and so I'd like to dig into this and get everybody's perspective, right? And what's your journey been like, with that, right? Because often we're the only ones in the room, right? When you look around, and
Absolutely.
so what's that
Absolutely.
been like for your career? What are some of the things that you use to kind of help you get through it? And then, what's your look going forward? How do you see that changing?
Oh, absolutely. So I think that's a great question, first of all, and I want to give a major shout out to Equifax because it's an organization that really stands for its people. I'm wearing this shirt that says Black Dollar Matters, and it's actually our Black Employee Resource Group, right? The bold organization that was born out of the George Floyd events last year, and so I think it takes a lot of soul searching, from coming from where we're from and being who we are to really understand how to navigate through the corporate world, right? And and it is harder. I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. It is harder for Black folks because of stereotypes and negative preconceived notions about
Yeah.
our abilities. Um, but I think you know just like in any situation, being self-aware goes a long way. And I didn't discover that until much later in my career. Like where I am at Equifax right now, I'm really able to bring my full self to work, right? Like I'm Black, I'm African, I'm a father, I have three girls, I'm a girl's dad. I'm
Girl,
passionate,
dad.
you know what I mean? I'm passionate about financial literacy in the Black community, and so is my wife. And so, it goes, the organizational values that Equifax exudes are aligned with mine. So it makes my job a lot easier, right?
Right.
And I tell the story all the time because from Wells Fargo to Equifax, both companies have very similar value statements, and that kind of resonated with me, and that kind of helped me stay the course. Wells Fargo at the time, I think our mission statement was we want to help our customer to succeed financially, because when they succeed financially, Wells Fargo succeeds financially, right? We know that ended up in some um, technical issues, I would say, but
Yeah.
that's neither here or
A little
there.
bit. A little
Um,
bit.
Equifax's slogan is to help people live their financial best. So it's quite similar, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's always about your financial life and how to succeed and how to live the best possible financial life that you could ever create for yourself. And with that said, it's very easy for me to work for a company like that because my values totally align with that, right? Now,
Absolutely, man.
in terms of me bringing my full self to work again, right? Like I've been able now, with all of the maturity that I've acquired over the years, to really understand, like, where I can contribute and bring some of my skill set to help the greater good, right? So I'm an active member of Bold, and within Bold, we're trying to do a lot of financial education activities. Right, we're really trying to get into the communities and make sure that
Fantastic.
the knowledge is being spread out. Right, and all of that is aligned with Equifax strategic objectives. So it's really easy, for us to get alignment from that, even at the senior leadership level. Right, so it's one of those things. I think it wasn't always that way. I think George
Yeah.
Floyd and everything that happened last year really changed the narrative, shifted the narrative a little bit. We had a lot of corporations that went out and signed pledges of diversity and inclusion and all of that. And so now I think after about a year and a couple of months, it's time for action, right?
Yeah.
Like now we're past the oh yeah, we're gonna issue the statement. Now it's like, okay, what have you done within that year
Right.
that has gone by? And so within Equifax, there's been a lot of engagement. There's been a lot of um, ideas and brainstorming and making sure that we have a firm strategy to kind of help our constituent, like our Black employees and Black people in general, like the community and minorities, and not just Black people, right? Like underserved minorities, right?
Right.
There's opportunities to address things like thin filers, right? People who are either new on the financial side of things, or they're new to the country, or they haven't been in an environment where they could participate in the financial economy, and so now they're kind of left out. So how do we incorporate all of those people into the system, right? Like, so that's financial inclusion. And so it's been very rewarding at this point in my life, at this point in my career, at this company. It's very gratifying. I get opportunities to meet with leaders that I probably wouldn't have opportunities to meet on a day to day, just because I'm involved in those things.
Yeah.
And and I have also leadership, vouching for me and doing those things. So it's a great space that I'm in right now. But historically, it wasn't always the case, right? I've been in a situation where you would have good performance reviews, right? Like, but you're not necessarily moving, whether it's
Right.
upward or even laterally, right? Like you're
Yeah.
not really moving anywhere. And so you kind of have to know what you want. Um, and you have to be focused, and you have to communicate what you want. I think a lot of the time, uh, we're keeping to ourselves a lot instead of
Yeah.
being overly communicative. And you have to put yourself out there, right? Like, because people are going to hold you accountable, and if you ask, then you shall receive what you ask, right? But if you never ask, then you will never receive.
Right.
So I know it's a little bit different than, like, traditionally what people have been talking about in terms of corporate, and I don't want to downplay that side of the corporate life for minorities. I think it's hard. I think you got to be twice as good. um, and you gotta do your best to get exposure, right? Like, so it's hard. It's hard, and it's not going to shift easily. I think it's going
Right.
to take a lot of time. It's going to take some intentional leadership and some
Mm.
intentional commitment towards diversity and inclusion to really shift the needle. Um, and but the truth's going to be in the pudding, right? Like, because we are all watching now. So we're going to see how corporations or making moves going forward, right? It's kind of an employees market right now. Um, the employment numbers came out today are looking great. I know we're losing people left and right. I'm trying to hold on to my good team members, but it's tough. So companies have to do the right thing if you
Yeah.
want to be competitive, right? Because your people are a competitive advantage,
Yeah.
and you definitely have to stay focused on that. So I think um, HBCUs have also been brought to light a lot as of late.
Sir.
And yeah, I can tell, alumni out there.
Sir.
So so that it's awesome, because we got to continue that, right? Because they play an important role as well in terms of our education and our literacy overall. So things like financial literacy in HBCU as a partnership. I think things like that are stuff that I live for, man. I would love to get involved in some type of
Okay,
activities.
so there's already two or three things that we gonna connect on outside of this podcast already. But yeah, we gonna get an Equifax and A&T collaboration happening, because I mean, absolutely, to all of it, right? Like, it is desperately needed. I will ride for every single HBCU except for FAMU and Hampton, but every other one I will ride for every single
Oh
HBCU.
man,
Um,
FAMU, you gonna lose some major support at Equifax if you discount FAMU, man.
Hey, and look,
Got
it's
big
cool. It's
alumni
cool.
in here.
They know what it is. Look, man, fam, you don't want look. It's we ain't gonna get into that. We ain't gonna get into that today. But
I'm just messing
no,
with you.
it was, and I've talked about it a number of times. Like, it was the experience completely changed my life and changed the trajectory of where I was going with my life, and made me like who I am, the man that I am today, the relationships that I've created from that, and just the path that it set me on to realizing, the things that we could do, and the power of community.
Yeah.
But we'll come back to those. But we're gonna wrap up. I do appreciate you like coming on the pod. Now, I didn't warn you about this, and that was my bad. I forgot, but not really, because I like to catch everybody with this, right? So every pod, right, ends with the same question. I ask everybody the same question into the pod.
That's right.
What do you want your legacy to be?
Wow. Um, I want my legacy to be someone who um, wanted to do something bigger than himself.
Mm.
I want, and me and my wife are really focused on building generational wealth in the Black community. And if there's anything that we want to our legacy to be, is to do that, right? To help spread generational wealth in our community.
Amen.
It's a big one. So
That's all I can say to that one. I will say this: we have very, very, very similar goals. That is the same thing that I want to do. So I will know that you have an ally, you have a friend, you have whatever I need to be to help you with that, because that is literally it is literally part of the reason why I moved down to Atlanta, why I've created some of the initiatives that I have, was to come and make sure that we can continue to be a resource to the rest of the community, and continue to uplift the next generations, and show us as a community that there are so many things that we can do when we focus on the positivity and we focus on the right things. So I'm not going to preach to the choir today.
Amen.
Another pod. All right, man. Serge, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This has been great, man. This has been a great conversation. And look, we are both in Atlanta, so outside of this, we're gonna link up and we gonna
definitely. We gotta catch up for a drink or something, man. Especially
definitely,
outside, right?
All right. Well, everybody, thanks for tuning in. You guys know what it is. Subscribe to the C3 podcast, to the next cocktail, to the next conversation. Y'all stay safe out there.
Thanks, David. Have a good night.
All right.